Imagine the moment when you realize you can't keep pretending anymore. The masks you've worn for years suddenly feel heavy and false. The games people play around you become painfully clear. The life you've built begins to feel less like freedom and more like a cage built from other people's expectations. This isn't depression, it's awakening. And with that awakening comes a gradual release of everything that isn't truly yours. Carl Jung dedicated his life to observing this process. He witnessed thousands of people undergo spiritual change and discovered something striking. Authentic growth doesn't come from bold declarations or sudden shifts. It emerges through a slow letting go, an easing out of old habits that once kept you safe but now feel suffocating. Today, we'll explore 7 patterns. Jung noticed that spiritually awakening people naturally begin to release. These aren't deliberate choices at first. They're more like inner rejections of what no longer feels real. You don't wake up and decide to quit them. You wake up realizing you already have. If you felt like you can't participate in life the way you once did, like you're no longer compatible with ordinary routines, this may be why. Your spirit is gradually discarding everything that doesn't match your truth. And Jung believed this rejection isn't just natural, but necessary for transformation. The first thing spiritually awake people slowly let go of is the constant hunger for approval. Not because they choose to, but because something shifts inside them, making the search for validation deeply uncomfortable. It's like living your whole life on sugar, then suddenly becoming intolerant to it. The approval you once depended on begins to feel toxic. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly. As people grew spiritually, they described strange unease in situations where they once thrived on recognition. A woman who built her life around her mother's approval suddenly felt sick when trying to please her. A man obsessed with professional recognition found himself indifferent to promotions. This isn't rebellion, it's evolution. What's happening is that spiritual growth reconnects you to what Jung called the self, your true essence beyond the ego. The self doesn't need approval because it already feels whole. Like a tree rooted in deep groundwater, it no longer depends on rainfall, but this release doesn't happen overnight. It's slow and sometimes painful. You may catch yourself in a meeting about to say what others expect, and suddenly the words won't come. Your body resists. You might even sweat. This isn't anxiety. It's your authentic self refusing to perform. One of Jung's patients described it clearly. I used to reshape my whole personality depending on who I was with. Now when I try, it's like my soul pulls the brakes. I simply can't do it anymore. This shift creates a strange in-between stage. Inside, you've quit seeking approval, but outwardly you're still adjusting. You stop posting for likes, but still check your phone. You stop fishing for compliments, but still notice when they're absent. You're caught between worlds, no longer dependent on approval, but not yet fully free from it. Jung noted that this process can take years. Usually it begins with strangers, then acquaintances, then friends, and finally the hardest, family. Each step brings both freedom and loss. Because you're not just ending a behavior, you're letting go of an identity. The woman who lived for her mother's validation experienced months of withdrawal. She would instinctively reach for her phone to call her mother for reassurance, only to remember she couldn't anymore. Not because her mother wasn't available, but because her soul refused to let her. Her hands would literally tremble when she tried. But here's the remarkable part. Jung documented that as the craving for approval fades, something new takes shape, an unshakable sense of inner worth. Not confidence, which still depends on others, but worth that comes only from within. You stop seeking validation outside because you finally feel your own existence from the inside out. This is why deeply spiritual people often appear mysteriously assured. They're not trying to be confident. They've simply stepped out of the exhausting cycle of proving their right to exist through others' approval. They've found what Jung described as inner authority, a compass that remains steady no matter what others think. The second thing spiritual people gradually give up often surprises many: the need to be special. At first, this seems counterintuitive. Aren't spiritual people supposed to realize they're unique? Yes, but there's a big difference between knowing your uniqueness and craving specialness. Jung observed that as people grow spiritually, they encounter what feels like a paradox. They become more authentic and distinct while caring less about recognition. They embody their individuality while seeking less acknowledgement for it. They become remarkable by no longer needing to appear remarkable. Here's how it unfolds. In the early stages of spiritual growth, people often pass through what Jung called spiritual inflation. After a genuine awakening, they feel chosen, superior, or set apart. They believe they've accessed truths others haven't, touched realms others can't, or gained knowledge hidden from most. For a time, this sense of specialness feels like genuine achievement. You may find yourself, subtly or openly, making others aware of your meditation practice, your synchronicities, or your insights. You're not exactly boasting, but you are setting yourself apart from what you see as the unconscious majority. But then, something shifts. Jung noticed this change in every sincere spiritual seeker he studied. The need to be special begins to feel heavy, tiring, or false, like a costume that once felt like wings, but now weighs you down like chains. One of Jung's patients built his entire identity on being spiritually advanced. He was the one friends sought for guidance, the one with the deepest reflections, the one who meditated longer, fasted harder, and knew more about consciousness than anyone else. Then one day, while explaining some profound concept, he stopped mid-sentence. Later he told Jung, "I suddenly saw myself from the outside, and I looked absurd. I was using spirituality to feel special, which is the opposite of being spiritual." That realization begins what Jung called the slow quit. You start catching yourself just before mentioning a spiritual experience for the sake of feeling special. You notice yourself wanting to hint at your level of awareness or position yourself as more awakened, and each time it becomes harder to continue. This quitting process shows up in subtle ways. You stop mentioning your practices unless someone asks directly. You lose interest in comparing states of consciousness. You no longer feel the need to share your insights for recognition. You grow comfortable with being seen as ordinary. You stop using spiritual language as a way to elevate yourself. One woman shared her transformation. She said, "I used to need everyone to see me as different, deeper, more aware. Now I'm content being unnoticed. Wanting to be special was like a prison. Being nobody feels like freedom." What Jung found remarkable was this: when people stop needing to be special, they actually become truly unique. Not in a showy way, but in an authentic way. The moment you stop trying to stand out, your natural self begins to shine. When you no longer perform your specialness, your real qualities come forward. Jung called this individuation without inflation. It means becoming fully yourself without requiring recognition. Like a flower that blooms whether anyone sees it or not, the blooming exists for itself, not for the audience. This change frightens the ego, which often builds its entire identity around being special. The ego asks, "If I'm not special, then what am I?" The answer is simple, but takes years to accept. You are yourself, and that is enough. That is everything. The third thing deeply spiritual people give up is perhaps the most unexpected: the performance of happiness. Not happiness itself, but the act of constantly appearing positive, enlightened, and untouched by suffering. Jung noted that genuine spiritual growth doesn't make people endlessly happy. It makes them consistently real. And real life includes the full range of emotions: joy and sadness, calm and conflict, light and shadow. In our culture, there's heavy pressure to look happy, especially if you identify as spiritual. The expectation is to rise above negative emotions, ignore small concerns, and radiate love and light without pause. But Jung saw that this performance of happiness is not spiritual at all. It's simply another mask, only dressed in spiritual language. As individuals grow in authentic depth, They gradually step away from this tiring act. They stop pretending everything is fine when it isn't. They stop forcing smiles while grieving or repeating positive affirmations when they are honestly in pain. Instead of bypassing struggles, they embody them. One therapist Jung supervised experienced this shift profoundly. Her entire practice was built on being the serene, enlightened guide, always calm, always wise, always radiant. Then her son passed away, and the performance collapsed. She tried to continue her work in that persona, but her body resisted. Sitting with clients, attempting to appear centered, tears would fall uncontrollably. She told Jung, "I thought being spiritual meant rising above human suffering. Now I see it means accepting it fully. I can't be the enlightened one anymore." If you recognize yourself in these patterns, if you feel a gradual release from things you once held tightly, know that you are not alone. This process of letting go of what no longer serves us is unfolding for millions of awakening souls right now. Before we explore the next 4 things spiritual people often leave behind, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Join a community of seekers who are courageously shedding the false in order to embrace the true. And in the comments, share what you found yourself slowly quitting. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Let's continue this journey together, because the next patterns may be the very ones you are facing right now. The 4th thing highly spiritual people gradually release may be the most unsettling: the need for certainty. The urge to hold tightly to answers, explanations, and understanding. Jung discovered that authentic spiritual growth does not bring more answers, but rather comfort with questions. It does not create more certainty, but instead peace with mystery. It replaces the need to know with the ability to wonder. This shift is unsettling for the mind, which has spent years gathering certainties like armor. I know who I am. I know what's true. I know how life works. I know what happens after death. I know my purpose. These convictions feel like safety, yet Jung observed that they often function as prisons. As spiritual awareness deepens, these certainties begin to crack, not because they are proven false, but because the very need for certainty itself is revealed as an obstacle to truth. Truth cannot be grasped. It must be experienced. The moment you cling to it, it hardens into dogma. One of Jung's most gifted patients, a physicist, experienced this firsthand. His awakening shattered his scientific certainties. He confessed, "I used to think I knew how the universe worked. Now I realize I don't even know how my coffee cup works. The more aware I become, the less certain I am about anything." This wasn't confusion, it was clarity. He was seeing beyond the illusion of knowledge into the reality of mystery. Yet the transition was painful. His mind longed to rebuild certainty, to replace old scientific facts with new spiritual ones. But every attempt to fix truth into a solid form dissolved. Jung watched him slowly release this need for stable ground. First, he let go of needing to know how things work. Then he released the need to know why things happen. Finally, he surrendered the need to know who he truly was. He entered what Jung described as the cloud of unknowing, a state where not knowing becomes more authentic than any attempt at knowing could ever be. This release of certainty happens gradually. First comes the loosening of certainty about the external world. Then you let go of certainty about other people's motives. Then you release certainty about your own past. Finally, you let go of certainty about your very identity. Each step of release brings both fear and freedom. To the ego, it feels like death, the death of the controlling mind that once kept you safe, but also confined. One woman described her journey. "I used to hold strong opinions about everything: politics, spirituality, relationships, purpose. Now, when someone asks what I believe, I honestly don't know. Not from confusion, but from openness. Every certainty I release creates room for something more meaningful than answers. Presence with what is." Jung observed that those who successfully release certainty develop a rare quality, the ability to hold paradox. They can embrace opposing truths without forcing resolution. They can act decisively without absolute assurance. They can commit wholeheartedly while staying open to being completely wrong. This is not shallow relativism. It's what Jung recognized as spiritual maturity, the understanding that reality is greater than any mental framework can capture. You release certainty not because nothing is true, but because truth is alive and cannot be confined to rigid concepts. The fifth thing deeply spiritual people gradually release is one of the most difficult: blame. Not just blaming others, but the entire victim-perpetrator narrative the ego uses to explain suffering. You'll notice that as people evolve spiritually, their relationship with pain changes profoundly. They stop identifying as victims of others' actions and begin seeing themselves as participants in a larger pattern. This doesn't mean excusing harm or bypassing trauma. It means reclaiming power. Letting go of blame is often slow and painful because blame serves many purposes. It explains our suffering. It protects our sense of innocence. It gives us an identity. It even bonds us with others who have been wronged. Releasing blame can feel like releasing our whole story. One woman came to Jung carrying genuine grievances: an abusive childhood, a betraying ex-husband, discriminatory employers. Her anger was valid, her blame understandable, but it was also consuming her. She was so attached to her identity as a victim that she could not move forward. Over years of work, Jung saw her gradually release blame, not by denying her pain or rushing to forgiveness, but by recognizing her own participation in recurring patterns. She realized how she unconsciously chose partners who would betray her, jobs where she would face discrimination, and situations that reinforced her victim identity. She once told Jung, "The day I stopped blaming was the day I felt free. Not because others weren't at fault, they were, but because I realized that clinging to blame was my own choice. I had been using their wrongs to avoid facing my own responsibility for life." This shift is painful for the ego. It means taking ownership of things that truly weren't your fault. It means recognizing how you unconsciously took part in your own pain. It means admitting that on some level you needed the very experiences you spent years blaming others for. Jung described the stages of moving beyond blame: rage at the unfairness. This shouldn't have happened. Recognition of patterns. This keeps repeating. Awareness of unconscious participation. Somehow I contribute to this radical responsibility. I am the author of my experience, transcending the victim-perpetrator dynamic. We are all playing roles in each other's awakening. A man who had spent decades blaming his father for his struggles went through this process. He said, "I realized I had turned my father into a monster to avoid seeing my own shadows. The day I stopped blaming him, I saw him clearly for the first time, not as a villain, but as another wounded human doing his best with his own pain. And I saw myself clearly too, not as a victim, but as a soul who chose this father for my own growth." This doesn't mean accepting abuse or remaining in harmful situations. It means recognizing that even our wounds serve our awakening. Jung observed that people who stop blaming don't become passive. They become strong. They stop letting others control their story. The sixth thing spiritually mature people let go of is more subtle: spiritual bypassing. This means using spiritual ideas to avoid genuine human experience, using practices to escape difficult emotions, or using the pursuit of enlightenment as a way to sidestep being human. Jung noticed this often in spiritual communities, people using meditation to avoid feeling, saying everything happens for a reason to dismiss grief, using "we're all one" to avoid boundaries, or clinging to ego death to avoid real psychological work. In such cases, the spiritual path becomes another defense mechanism. But with true spiritual maturity, bypassing is no longer possible. The soul demands full embodiment, both spiritual and human, transcendent and grounded, infinite and intimate. You can no longer use heaven to escape earth. A Buddhist practitioner came to Jung after 20 years of meditation. He had reached extraordinary states of consciousness, experienced deep emptiness, and touched the void. Yet his personal life was in ruins. His relationships failed, his emotions were numbed, and he lived in disconnection. He had used enlightenment as a way to bypass his humanity. Jung observed him slowly step away from this bypass, a process far more painful than his original awakening. He had to return to his body, his emotions, and his basic human needs and desires. After experiencing the infinite, he now had to rediscover what it meant to be finite. After knowing the absence of self, he had to build a healthy self once again. He described it this way: "I thought spirituality was about transcending human life. Now I see it is about truly living it. I spent 20 years trying to be nobody. Now I'm learning how to be somebody. This specific person with this particular life, wounds, and gifts." Letting go of spiritual bypassing looked like accepting that he had preferences, even while understanding acceptance. Feeling anger, even while knowing others were doing their best. Longing for intimacy, even while recognizing oneness. Setting boundaries, even while perceiving all as self. Experiencing fear, even while trusting the universe. This, Jung noted, is the essence of spiritual maturity, the ability to be fully human and fully spiritual at the same time. Not using one to avoid the other, but living at the meeting point where heaven and earth intersect. The last thing deeply spiritual people give up may come as a surprise: the isolation of awakening. The belief that spiritual growth means separation from others, that higher consciousness must create loneliness, that awakening requires being alone. Jung observed that while solitude often plays a role in spiritual growth, genuine maturity always returns to connection, but of a new kind. Not the unconscious merging of those still asleep, but the conscious meeting of those awake. In the early stages of awakening, isolation feels necessary, even honorable. You see through illusions others still believe. You feel what others cannot. You know what others do not. How can you possibly connect with those still asleep? But Jung noticed that, with continued growth, this sense of spiritual superiority begins to fade. People let go of the subtle arrogance of being more conscious. They stop holding on to the identity of being the awakened one among the sleeping. They abandon the isolation that once shielded them from true intimacy. A woman who had spent years in spiritual solitude told Jung, "I believed I was alone because I was too conscious for others. I came to see that I was alone because I was afraid of being seen in my humanity, in my struggles, in the moments when I was far from enlightened." What felt like spiritual isolation was, in truth, spiritual pride. But when she let go of that isolation, something remarkable happened. She realized she could connect with anyone, not by lowering her awareness, but by embracing her humanness. She could be with those less conscious without judgment, because she had recognized her own unconscious patterns. She could care for those still asleep, because she remembered her own sleep. Jung explained that real spiritual growth leads to what he called a conscious relationship. This means being able to connect without losing oneself, to love without attachment, to share intimacy without merging, and to speak truth without preaching. It is the ability to be together while remaining whole. Ending isolation does not mean slipping back into unconscious social behaviors. It means seeking out those rare individuals who are also letting go of approval seeking, of specialness, of constant performance, of the need for certainty, of blame, of spiritual bypassing, and with them building something new, a conscious community, as we come to the end of this exploration of what highly spiritual people give up. Jung emphasized one vital point: this quitting is not about loss, it is about freedom. Each release makes room for something more authentic to unfold. When you stop chasing approval, inner worth arises. When you let go of being special, true uniqueness appears. When you stop performing happiness, genuine joy is revealed. When you give up the need for certainty, wisdom emerges. When you let go of blame, personal power comes through. When you stop bypassing, embodiment happens. And when you release isolation, real connection becomes possible. This journey takes time because it is more than a change in behavior. It is the death and rebirth of identity. You are not just quitting habits. You are letting go of who you thought you were. And that requires time, courage, and deep compassion for yourself. Jung noted that such transformation often unfolds over many years, sometimes even decades. You will quit and then return, release and grasp again. Let go, then return. This isn't failure. It's the spiral nature of growth. Each time you revisit an old pattern, your attachment is weaker. Each time you hold on again, the grip feels lighter. If you're in the process of gradually quitting, Jung would remind you that you're not losing yourself. You're uncovering who you truly are. Every release carries insight. Each moment of letting go is a step back home. The habits you're leaving behind had to be lived before they could be released. You needed to chase approval, to feel the emptiness of external validation. You needed to be special, to experience the freedom of being ordinary. You needed certainty to value the mystery. You needed blame to reclaim your power. This isn't something you can rush or control. The process unfolds in its own rhythm, in its own way. Your task isn't to quit faster, but to stay present with the act of quitting, to notice what fades away, to grieve what ends, and to welcome what begins. And remember, you're not walking this path alone. Around the world, many souls are awakening and slowly releasing the same patterns. We're realizing that growth isn't about adding more, it's about letting go of what was never real. It's not about becoming someone new, but about quitting the false roles we once played. If this resonates with your journey, if you see your own slow release in these patterns, subscribe to this channel and join our community of awakening souls. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss our daily explorations into the spiritual path.